The gay flight attendant did this to me in the airplane bathroom. I boarded the plane expecting just another routine flight. I never imagined that a simple glance would change everything. He stood there, tall, confident, impossibly attractive. His uniform fit perfectly, his movements effortless. But it was his eyes that stopped me. There was something in them. A challenge? A secret? I tried to ignore it. But then he called me over. His voice was steady, unreadable. "Sir, follow me." Passengers around us remained unaware as I got up, my heart racing. I followed him through the narrow aisle, past the dim overhead lights. And then he opened the bathroom door. "Inside." The door locked. The space shrank. His breath was warm against my skin. Then, he did something I never expected. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what happens next. The moment I stepped onto the plane, I felt it. Something was different about this flight. At first, I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the heavy scent of coffee in the cabin, the dim lighting, or the soft hum of the engines vibrating through the floor. But when I saw him, everything clicked. He wasn't like the other flight attendants. Tall, effortlessly composed, his uniform crisp against his toned body. He moved with precision, his posture upright, his hands adjusting the silver wings pinned to his chest. Professional. But there was something else. Something beneath the surface. And then his eyes met mine. It was brief, just a flicker, a passing glance. But it was enough. I should have looked away. I should have ignored it. But I didn't. Instead, I held his gaze for a second longer than I should have. Just enough to make my stomach tighten, my breath hitch. Just enough to make me wonder if he felt it too. I forced myself to break the connection, sliding into my seat, gripping the armrest a little too tightly. It was nothing. Just a look. A moment. But I could still feel him watching me. Minutes passed. The flight took off. Passengers settled in. Conversations blurred together in a distant murmur. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the weight of his stare. Then, he moved. I saw him step down the aisle, checking on passengers, his voice smooth and steady as he spoke. When he got closer, I forced myself to focus on the window, watching the endless stretch of clouds below. But he stopped, right beside me. "Sir." His voice was calm, polite. But there was something in it. A layer beneath the professionalism, something only I could hear. I turned my head, my pulse spiking. "Yes?" He glanced at my seatbelt, then at me. A silent request. I hesitated, then unbuckled it, my fingers suddenly clumsy. Why was I nervous? "Follow me." My breath caught. Passengers around us barely noticed as I stood up, heart hammering. This was ridiculous. This was nothing. And yet, I followed. He walked ahead, not looking back. Confident, assured, like he already knew I would come. Through the narrow aisle, past the curtain separating first class, and then we reached the back of the plane. The galley was dimly lit, stocked with supplies, the scent of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the air. It was quiet. Too quiet. He turned to me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the plane, the low murmur of passengers, the occasional chime of a call button, felt 1,000 miles away. Then, without breaking eye contact, he opened the bathroom door. My breath hitched. "Inside," he said, his voice lower now. Different. A command. I hesitated, my mind racing. This was insane. Completely reckless. but the air between us was thick with something I couldn't ignore. I stepped in. The door locked behind me. The tiny space felt even smaller with him inside. The overhead light flickered slightly, casting faint shadows on his face. His jaw was sharp, his lips pressed together in an unreadable expression. I swallowed hard. I should say something, anything, but I couldn't find the words. Then, he reached out. His fingers brushed against the edge of my shirt. Not an accident. A test. I sucked in a breath, my skin burning where he touched me. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He tilted his head slightly. "I think you already know." My heart pounded. He was right. I knew exactly what was happening. I could stop this. I could unlock the door. I could pretend this moment never happened. But I didn't move. Instead, I watched as his fingers traveled upward, tracing a slow, deliberate path along my chest. Every nerve in my body came alive. His breath was warm against my neck. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because I didn't want him to, and he knew it. Then, he did something I never expected. The space between us was almost non-existent. I could feel his breath against my skin, warm, steady, controlled, in contrast to my own, which had grown uneven, erratic. Every inch of me was hyper-aware of him. The way his fingers had traced over my shirt, the way his body hovered just close enough to set my nerves on fire. The air inside the tiny bathroom felt charged, like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. His gaze locked onto mine, unwavering, challenging. "Tell me to stop," he murmured again, his voice even lower this time. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat felt tight, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid it would give me away. I didn't tell him to stop. Instead, I stood there, letting the moment stretch between us. The tension thickened, becoming almost unbearable. And then, he moved. Not rushed, not desperate. Intentional, calculated. His fingers, firm yet teasing, slipped beneath the edge of my shirt, brushing against my skin. A slow, deliberate touch that sent a shiver straight down my spine. I exhaled sharply, gripping the tiny sink behind me, grounding myself. I shouldn't let this happen, but I wanted to. His lips were close now, so close that I could almost feel them against my jaw. He wasn't touching me there. Not yet. But the promise of it was almost worse. My hands clenched tighter on the sink's edges. I wasn't the type to do this. I wasn't the type to throw caution away. And yet, I was standing in a locked airplane bathroom, letting this man unravel me with a single touch. Then, he did something I never expected. He stopped. Just as suddenly as he had closed the space between us, he pulled back. The loss of his warmth was jarring, and my breath hitched as I opened my eyes to find him watching me, waiting. He studied my face as if searching for something, doubt, hesitation, regret, but there was none, not from me. His lips curled slightly, just the hint of a smirk. "You want this," he said, his voice smooth, knowing. I swallowed hard. My pulse was still racing, but I didn't deny it. How could I? Something flashed in his eyes, something dark and confident. He had me. He knew it. And then, this time with no hesitation, he closed the distance again. His lips met mine, firm and insistent, and everything inside me ignited. I had never been kissed like this before. Like a secret. Like a promise. My hands finally released their grip on the sink, sliding up his arms, feeling the tension beneath his uniform. He wasn't unaffected. His breathing was just as uneven, his grip on my waist tightening as if he needed me closer. The reality of where we were, what we were doing, faded. There was only him. Only this. The low hum of the plane, the scent of his cologne, the way his fingers traced the curve of my jaw before tilting my chin up, deepening the kiss. I should have been thinking about what this meant, about what would happen next, about what I was risking. But when he broke away just enough to whisper, "No turning back now," I knew I didn't want to. And then, a knock, loud, sharp, a flight attendant's voice muffled through the door. "Sir, is everything okay in there?" My entire body went still. Reality crashed back. His eyes met mine. A silent question, a challenge, a thrill. And suddenly, I had a choice to make. Knock, knock. The sharp sound echoed in the tiny space, snapping me back into reality. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stared at him, our breath still mingling in the charged, intimate air between us. "Sir, is everything okay in there?" The voice outside was calm, professional, but the weight of it sent a wave of adrenaline through me. I should have felt panic. I should have moved away. But I didn't. Neither did he. Instead, his gaze remained locked on mine, something dark and thrilling flickering in his eyes. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. His hand was still on my waist. His body was still close, too close, trapping me between him and the locked door. I swallowed hard. My voice cracked and I cleared my throat quickly. "Yeah, everything's fine." Silence. A pause. Then, "All right, sir. Let us know if you need anything." The footsteps retreated. The moment they faded, he let out a breathy chuckle, tilting his head slightly. "Nervous?" I glared at him. "You're enjoying this way too much." He arched an eyebrow, his fingers tracing a slow path down my side. "And you're not?" I sucked in a sharp breath as his touch sent shivers down my spine. I had no defense. I wanted this. The way he looked at me, the way his body fit against mine in this impossibly tight space, it was intoxicating. My mind screamed at me to be rational, to think this through. But my body wanted more. I exhaled shakily, my grip tightening on his arm. "If we get caught, then we get caught." His voice was low, steady, deliberate. "Tell me to stop, and I will." I stared at him, my chest rising and falling fast. I could walk away right now, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned in. His lips met mine again, and this time, there was no hesitation. His kiss was deep, urgent, consuming. His hands pressed against my back, pulling me closer, erasing whatever distance remained between us. I let myself sink into it. Let myself forget the world outside. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking. I wasn't hesitating. I was just feeling. And then, the turbulence hit. A sudden jolt rocked the plane, sending us stumbling against the walls of the tiny bathroom. I let out a grunt as my back hit the door. His hands immediately shot out to steady me, his grip firm, protective. We both froze, eyes locked. Then, to my surprise, he laughed. It was soft at first, then genuine, full-bodied, like he couldn't help himself. I blinked. "What's so funny?" He smirked. "You. This situation. All of it." I ran a hand through my hair, shaking my head with a breathless chuckle. "Yeah, well, I wasn't exactly planning on making out with a flight attendant in a bathroom at 35,000 feet today." His fingers tightened on my waist, just for a second. "Guess I'm full of surprises." I met his gaze, my pulse still racing. "What happens now?" For the first time, something shifted in his expression. The playful confidence was still there, but underneath it, I caught a flicker of something more. Something real. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his thumb brushed over my hip, slow and deliberate. Then, finally, he murmured, "That depends on you." I sucked in a breath. I wanted this to continue, but was I really ready for where this might lead? Before I could respond, another knock came, but this time, the voice was different. "Ethan, I need you back in the cabin." I stiffened. His name. I hadn't even asked for it yet. He sighed, closing his eyes briefly before stepping back, putting space between us for the first time. I hated how cold the air felt without him. Then he looked at me. "You should go first," he said. "I'll follow in a minute." I hesitated. Everything inside me screamed that this wasn't finished. But I nodded, composing myself before unlocking the door and slipping out. As I walked back to my seat, I didn't look back. But I felt him, watching me, waiting. And something told me this was far from over. I walked back to my seat, heart still pounding, body still thrumming with electricity from what had just happened. I could feel his presence behind me. Ethan. I hadn't even known his name before. But now, it was seared into my mind. I sat down, trying to appear calm, like I hadn't just had my entire world turned upside down in a tiny airplane bathroom. My fingers tightened around the armrests as I stared out the window, my reflection barely visible against the endless stretch of clouds. Passengers around me were lost in their own world, reading, watching movies, sleeping, clueless about the storm raging inside me. Then, movement. Ethan emerged from the back, his expression unreadable, his body moving with that same effortless confidence. I didn't turn my head, but I knew the second his gaze found me. And then, as he passed by my row, his fingers brushed against my shoulder. A touch so fleeting, so light, that anyone watching would have thought it was accidental. But I knew better. My breath caught. My hands clenched into fists, heat crawling up my neck. This wasn't over. I forced myself to focus on the flight, on the passing minutes. How much longer until we landed? Until I stepped off this plane and left this moment behind? And why did the thought of that bother me so much? I reached for my drink, desperate for distraction. But just as I lifted the cup to my lips, I noticed a folded napkin on my tray table. I frowned. I hadn't put it there. Slowly, heart hammering, I unfolded it. Inside, written in neat, confident handwriting, was a message. "Meet me after landing. Gate C-12." I exhaled sharply, my fingers gripping the napkin like it held some kind of secret I wasn't supposed to know. Ethan had left this. He wanted to see me again. I should have hesitated, should have questioned what I was doing, but I didn't, because deep down, I knew the answer. I wanted to see him too. The landing felt like an eternity. Every time Ethan walked past, I felt his presence like a spark ready to ignite. But we didn't acknowledge each other, not yet. When the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers scrambled to grab their bags, shuffling toward the exit. I forced myself to move at a normal pace, even though every cell in my body was wired with anticipation. By the time I stepped into the terminal, my heart was beating so hard it felt deafening. Gate C-12. I walked without hesitation, the napkin still crumpled in my fist. Then, I saw him. Ethan stood near the window, his arms crossed, looking impossibly calm, as if he hadn't just turned my entire world upside down. His eyes met mine, and just like before, that silent challenge was there. I swallowed hard. I didn't think flight attendants met passengers after landing. A slow smirk tugged at his lips. I don't. My pulse skipped. He stepped closer, close enough that I caught the faintest hint of his cologne, the same intoxicating scent from before. "Are you going to keep pretending this didn't happen?" he murmured. My throat went dry. He tilted his head slightly, waiting, daring me, and suddenly I was tired of running, tired of pretending. "I don't want to pretend," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's gaze darkened slightly, and for the first time I saw it, a flicker of something real beneath the teasing confidence. "Then don't," he said simply. The space between us disappeared, and just like that, I knew. This wasn't just a moment. This was the beginning of something much bigger. We stood there staring at each other, the world around us fading into a blur. I had a choice. Walk away or stay. Ethan's gaze burned into me, waiting, daring me. Then I took a step closer. He smirked, but this time there was something softer behind it. "Come with me," he murmured. I didn't hesitate. I followed him out of the terminal, heart pounding. He led me outside, past the crowds, into the quiet night air. His car was parked near the exit, black, sleek, just like him. Ethan opened the passenger door. "Get in." I hesitated, but not for long. The second the door closed, his hand was on my thigh. His voice was low, teasing. "Still pretending you don't want this?" I swallowed hard. "Not anymore." Ethan's smirk deepened. "Good." He started the engine. The drive was silent, thick with tension. Every few minutes, Ethan's fingers grazed my leg. My skin burned where he touched me. Then, he pulled into a parking garage. He shifted in his seat, turning to face me. His voice was rougher now. "Come upstairs." I should have thought twice, but I didn't. I followed him inside. His apartment was modern, dimly lit. The second the door closed, Ethan pushed me against it. His breath was warm against my ear. "I've been waiting for this all night." So had I. I grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer. And then, his lips crashed against mine. The kiss was fire. Desperate, hungry. His hands explored me, fingers tracing my back. I let myself get lost in it. Nothing else mattered. Ethan pulled me toward the bedroom. The night was just beginning. The sun peeked through the blinds. I woke up to warmth. A steady heartbeat. Ethan's arm was draped over me, his breath slow and even. It wasn't just a moment. It was real. I smiled. Maybe this wasn't just one night. Maybe this was the start of something more.